What I'd like to explore in this video is the terrain of healing when our horror, our fear, our PTSD is activated. And to begin, I'll share or just do a little refresher of the map of the brain and the map of trauma. So, down in our reptilian brain, where we have our fight, our flight, our instinctual energy, this is the place that we go to when we're in trauma. And this is a very sociopathic part of the brain because it's designed for reflexes to keep us safe. Now, it draws upon mental data from our life, but it uses it instinctively or sociopathically to cope. And the way that I experience it is like this. A young age that experienced severe pain, abandonment, abuse, loneliness, comes in a wave formation into my consciousness and kind of breaks across my consciousness. When it reaches a certain intensity of panic, fear, loneliness that feels like trauma, I go down into this part of the brain in a desperate attempt to, quote, jump out of the way of the bus. Only the bus being emotional, the way to jump out of the way of this bus is to fixate, to draw a narrow beam focus on something that is intense enough to serve as an effective distraction. Now, my other option is just to collapse and kind of go into overwhelm, sleep, or use sugar, or if I was someone who drank, I would probably drink. So this would be a physical way to step out of the bus. But my way has always been to fixate. And when I fixate on something, I get relief from the trauma. However, there's a range, so the fixation itself is relief, but the question is whether or not the relief is medicinal or purely distraction. What I mean by that is, for example, I can fixate on pornography, and there's a little bit of medicine in the sense that I'm being reminded and seeing images of bonding, of human bonding in the most intense ways, which is a little bit medicinal, I say, because a lot of the terror and abandonment and loneliness came from not being able to bond with either of my parents after feeling traumatized. So I would be traumatized, whether it was by the family dog or my parents fighting or being hit or whatever it was, very young. And I go into trauma, and then I desperately seek reassurance to bond with something but it's not there. There's nothing stable, safe, and present there to bond to. And so I get locked into this state of terror, loneliness, fear, overwhelm, with nowhere to go. And as a child, I dissociated at those points. A lot of things I just don't remember because I just blanked out. But as those emotional waves pass into my adult consciousness, there's the original feeling, but then there's a new feeling. There's a, oh my God, I don't know what's going on. Particularly until I understood trauma, I didn't know why this was happening. So my brain creates a new trauma, which is something that's more painful and intense than I've ever experienced, is just coming, i.e., that is a big threat. Like that amount of pain and fear and overwhelm is a big threat, meaning I can't even necessarily drive safely with that amount of overwhelm just passing through. But at the same time, I don't understand it because nobody's explained trauma to me and I didn't know how it works. In fact, people have explained just the opposite. People have said, just do this meditation or do this and that and the other. And I've done those thousands of hours of meditation, those thousands of hours of therapy. And so this registers in the brain not only as an intense pain, which because trauma is locked into the present in a certain way by turning off the timeless part of the brain, it feels like something horrendous must be happening in the present, or why am I feeling this way? So the brain races around, and when my life was more of a mess, my brain would say, oh, that's it. I'm feeling this way because of that. Which then was not traumatic in the present to the same degree because I felt I understood why it was happening. Well, then the answer, of course, is do something about that, whatever that problem is. Make more money, get out of debt, not sign up with this client, whatever it was that seemed like it could be the source of that. But once my reality reached a point that was, so above average, like I live peacefully in this beautiful home and am, quote, living the dream. Well, now there's a real trouble because my brain cannot come up with a logical story with the knowledge it has to explain the trauma. So then there's a new trauma. And therefore it doesn't know where to turn, which revs it up even further because there's nothing left to solve. I mean, if a reality this good is this terrifying and this painful and this lonely and this miserable, then I'm fucked because I can't imagine a reality that's really any better. There's no place I know to turn. So this creates a circular pattern of I've got to do something, I don't know what the fuck to do. And not knowing what to do brings up new feelings of helplessness, which is one of the biggest arrests and crises in trauma. And then I start panicking, and my whole strategy of dealing with the overwhelm most of my life has been to get manic at these times and do something productive, achieve a goal, etc. but with no clear goal to achieve, and layers and layers and layers of stress and chronic fatigue that's created an exhaustion. The idea of doing something for no reason doesn't make any sense, and it feels exhausting. And so this has been the bind that I've been in. And then the question becomes, where's a positive focus to turn to in this situation? And this is where that focus can be medicinal, truly healing of that childhood pain. See, now I know where it is. Now I know what's originally, I know I'm dealing with ages 1 to 3. And which of course are pre-language, and some of them are pre-memory. Now that I know where the focus is, the question is, how can I heal? How can I respond? How can I send love to the arenas? Because remember, like a tree, the core of the tree, when the tree was 1 month old, 2 month old, a year old, is still in the center of the tree. It's just got new rings and new rings for every year it's got older. And so that childhood geography is still right inside in the present. And for whatever reason, perhaps precisely because the outer reality is now safe, that is spilling out into consciousness. And it's so terrifying and so painful and so lonely that I can't face it in a direct head-on focus. So I've got to kind of zoom in to a bite-sized piece that I feel I can manage, and then flood that bite-sized piece with love. And that's now the work. So a lot of what provides narrow beam focus for an American man work is not medicinal at all. It actually aches terribly. You know, like I can go to work and I can cope if I've got a job to do, but it's miserable because that's part of what produced the pain to begin with. You know, having one father lost in work and a mother unable to emotionally bond and connect, and then trauma, and then nothing going on to bond to. And then I had younger siblings, but because my parents had done a variety of things that felt like psychological and physical torture, you know, whether it was beating or playing mind games, I did that to my younger siblings and felt horrified on some level at what I was doing, but that was kind of the template that I was given to interact. And that, doing that feels miserable, you know, and so I didn't have that when I was young. And I just did a variety of things when I was young to kind of cope. But at this stage, the question is, where can I find a purity and a quality of love that is both a narrow beam focus? It gives me something to put my mind towards so I'm not overwhelmed with these feelings, but also is medicinal as opposed to just distracting and emphasizing how lonely this world is, in the present as well as in the past. So a really close, bonded therapist who's really loving does it up to a point. And I say up to a point because to go into those feelings and then be jerked out in an hour is not okay. It doesn't feel safe, so I don't go into them to begin with. If I do 2.5-hour windows of therapy, there's enough of a container that I can go in. But that's just temporary relief. And then I come out and I'm left there dealing with it again. And that's traumatic because I don't know where to turn. And it leads to this feeling of helplessness. And so my quest, instinctively over the last 10 years, has been to find gentle, kind, caring women who I could pour my love into, and where I could put that relationship as my absolute #1 priority. The only challenge that I repeatedly run into is that most women who are not viewing the relationship in a sense as a healing relationship are not pouring that energy back. So I'm feeling lonely, I'm feeling scared, I'm feeling insecure, I'm feeling disappointed, I'm feeling hurt, that I'm not getting back that quality of love and attention that I'm giving out. Because when I step into a partnership with someone, I will do just about anything to champion that person. But one of the principles of loneliness is that we feel lonely, we can feel lonely when we're giving more than we're receiving. You know, when someone, that's usually the greatest pain when we're in a one-sided relationship. Now this is a matter of degrees. So if both people are casual, it's not a one-sided relationship. But if one person is casual and one person is absolutely desperate and devoted for a positive focus and a healing, and the other person isn't showing up, it's lonely, it's miserable, it's desperate. And this has been the bind that I've been in for years now. And you know, it'll take me maybe 100 or 200 or 300 invitations before I find someone who's just barely in the ballpark, and often they let me down, and it's just devastating. It's just devastating to go back into that trauma, be all alone there, and have no positive focus to direct towards. And I think when this happens too long and too often, I know what started to happen for me is a lot of hate, a lot of rage, a lot of bitterness, a lot of depression. But then that, because I'm not being seen, I'm not being met, I'm not being cared for, I'm not being loved in the way that I need to be loved. And I have no other place to turn, and I'm just being hit by these waves, you know, that are coming one after another. And then the hate, the rage, the desperation, and the panic become repellents in relationships. So then it's harder to attract someone when one feels cynical, rage, bitter, and hate, and angry, and hurt, that there's only a 1 in 200 chance that I'll actually receive some of the love and the care that I need desperately to provide the focus to heal and grow out of this, as opposed to just being complete coping and addiction. And by addiction, I just mean doing anything compulsively as opposed to from a real healing position. So this has been the trap, and I'm going through this cycle a lot more consciously now, as I'm in my present relationship. And I'm so fortunate. I identified as part of my, because, my whole strategy is to fixate on things that are as positive as possible. And knowing that relationship is there, having realized it's 250 to 1 in the US, and I can't deal with that anymore, with these intensity of waves, because several big recent traumas came up a couple of years ago, and they've amplified this whole process 3 to 5 times more than before. I couldn't take 250 rejections and drops to get one that would last, a month, a couple of months, etc. A lot of people burn out with this kind of intensity, even though it's a very positive intensity. People have told me, it's been heavenly, exquisite, intense, because within this narrow corridor, I'm able to be the person I want to be. And I am intelligent, and I am caring, and I am loving, and I do love. There's nothing that makes me so happy as to see my partner happy. And so, I've had, women, 50, 60 years old tell me that, they've had many boyfriends and lovers, and, that I was the one that really satisfied that deep pit of unlovability and just pouring that love into them. And this is very medicinal. And so I pivoted to, I started saying, there's got to be some place in the world where need is not shameful, where vulnerability is not shameful, where close bonding is considered normal and healthy. And Thailand and the Philippines are 2 of those countries where the odds go way down, from like 250 rejections to 1 solid, well-met relationship. And I want to, clarify, in case that's sounding a little strange, it's 250 rejections of 1 well-met, intense relationship. Someone who can spend 4 or more hours a day in tenderness, who doesn't hurt themselves, because that's so painful to see. When people criticize themselves, attack themselves, are ashamed of their feelings, apologize for their feelings, criticize me for my feelings. It's like, that is not medicinal. That is painful, exquisitely painful, because it's too painful to make my singular focus, which means I'm left in this broader pain that's washing over me regularly. And so it's 1 in 250 people who like themselves, who are gentle, who love to play, who love joy, who love beauty, and who will engage in that terrain in a rich enough dose on a daily basis that that's my world, not the world of this dissociative, painful trauma. And so the odds go up 10 times in Thailand because of the culture, because of the environment. The Buddhism there, it's beautiful. The spontaneity and feminine energy is beautiful. The love is beautiful. The responsiveness and empathy. Complete strangers in Thailand will embrace me and treat me warmer and kinder than close friends in the US, because of the different emphases within the culture and the different skills in relationship taught within the culture. And I can deal with, as painful as it is, I can deal with 10 rejections and 1 success. I can deal with that. I can't deal with 100, with 200. It's just, it reached a point where after more than 1,000 tries, I just felt despair and exhaustion, and I just couldn't go down that road again. So what do? Do I die? Or do I start hunting somewhere in the world? Looking around at feminine cultures, I looked at Bali. Italy has some of that. Denmark has a little. Europe has more than the US. Thailand, of all the places, celebrates feminine energy the most. Big challenge, though. No one in Thailand speaks English. No one. University professors who teach English, I dated one, don't speak full English. And so it's, and one of the core patterns that I deal with is the loneliness that I feel when I say something that's absolutely heart-wrenching, that it's so painful to see and to say that I can just barely look at it enough to say it. And if someone looks at me in a blank stare and says, what's that? I say, I can't go through that again. It's too much. I pivoted towards the Philippines for this reason, because almost everyone speaks English in the Philippines. There's a lot more dishonesty in the Philippines. I cannot tolerate lies at all. I've never lied to a partner. I've never betrayed a partner, and I cannot tolerate it. And 50% of the Filipinos, it's in a culture that's so dishonest in the ways that the government and the Catholic Church exploit the people. It's really painful to see that just to survive along with the poverty, there's just so much lies. And so it's hard in that angle to find people. And then of course, it's not a very cerebral culture in general. It's a much more heart-centered culture, which is way better than cold cerebralness that I can find easily in the United States. So finding that, and I found that sweetness and someone who can pretty much understand me and who likes to read my books and stuff, but I can just love her. I can love her and hold her and care for her, and receive her care. And she actually had a lot of trauma, so this is an even more potent focus. I can be a healer, a shaman for her by interrupting the abuse patterns that she's subject to and protecting her from that. Taking her out of the cycle of abusive relatives and giving her a cocoon and helping her find a family she can spend time with when I'm in the US, and helping her get out of her trauma. And the joy of watching someone else go from terror and hate and rage and fear up into their natural joy and abundance and exuberance and laughter and delight. It's so heavenly to know that I can be a part of that. And so that's that's working with this need to focus, working with the reality that it needs to be a really intense focus, or it's not loud enough to overshadow the past. If it's just very empty and peaceful, if I wasn't traumatized, it would be exquisite. But empty and peaceful in a way that exposes me to the exquisite pain of the trauma with no medicine is hell. So it needs to be intense enough on a daily basis that I can go to a positive oasis in my reality and feed love into that, feed care into that, feed beauty into that, and receive that in return reliably. Then my adrenals calm down. Then the waves become that much more manageable. then I'm paying less attention to the waves and more attention to going forward. And I have a little sliver, a little doorway in the whole world where I can become and grow, and it feels like life is worth living. And this is my recipe from, intense mental disease into intense growth, constructiveness, and positive well-being. And I'm sharing it here in part because I believe that a lot of us get lost in unhealthy fixations that allow us to cope with the momentary pain, but that deteriorate our life and make us less safe, bringing the trauma from the past through that mechanism into the present. And now we've got two traumas to deal with, the present and the past. And I think we need to get the present out of trauma, which is not easy, but this is one way that I've found. And then from there, use that vantage point, that oasis, to love and heal and keep working on the past in the best way that we know how. And blessings and good luck in your journey in this similar terrain.